thanks everybody for joining the Managing Video Surveillance and Security Systems with Scale Computing HC3. Today I'm joined by Dave Demlow, VP of Product Strategy at Scale Computing, as well as customer Jeff Miller, Director of Information Technology at Jerry's Enterprises. Thanks for joining us, and Dave, over to you.
All right, thanks. Thanks everyone for joining us. The topic today, we're going to talk about video surveillance and security and how it relates to hyperconverged systems to optimize efficiency, simplify and centralized management, and significantly reduce your overall infrastructure footprint, cost, and liability. So our guest also today is Jeff Miller, who was introduced. And to kind of set the stage, why Jeff's here. Jeff, can you describe a little bit about your video surveillance and security journey, your business, and introduce us to your configuration?
Sure. Hi, Dave, and everybody else. Thanks for coming. We are a retailer mostly in the Midwest, but also in Southern Florida, and we have about 50 locations. We were at kind of a turning point in our video deployment. Needed to up our game a little bit, security-wise and surveillance-wise. So we were able to bring our video software. We run two different systems, DW and Milestone, onto the Scale Computing infrastructure, and that was allowed us to fund a Scale Computing infrastructure in every location, all of our bigger locations, let me say. And with that, we can deploy more or less cameras as we need to, and increase our storage footprint as we need to, things like that. So it's been a godsend. Plus, we have all kinds of redundancy now that did not exist before.
Great, awesome. And I think throughout the presentation, we'll talk more about Jeff's implementation and some interesting stories about how video and security particularly relate to their business and retailing and so forth. So thanks for joining, and feel free to jump in throughout the presentation with your insights. So to kind of get a feel for who we have here, we want to do a couple polls here. So let me launch this here. First of all, we're interested to see how many people are currently running video surveillance, how many people are not running it, but business requirements may be changing, and they foresee the need for it. So we'll give a couple of minutes here, and in some of the further poll questions, we'll dig into who's responsible for video and security, which is an interesting topic on its own, and something that's kind of changing, as well as different ways of deploying it here. So looks like we're still getting some answers here. Looks like for the people on the call, a good percentage of them, 69%, are already running video surveillance. Another 31% are not, and I presume probably anticipating the need for running that. So that's great. Still got a few votes coming in, but I think we've got about 80% here. So all right, so a lot of existing video surveillance deployments out there. All right, so I guess I have to click and share the results here so everyone can see what I'm seeing. Again, just to summarize, about 69–70% are currently running video surveillance. So that is great. All right, let me get this out of the way and let's move on. So a little bit about where video surveillance and security are in terms of their life cycle and evolution. Not too long ago, video security was all analog cameras, CCTV, proprietary recording appliances, and the rise of networking, IP devices, intelligent cameras has all new systems are being deployed based on IP-based cameras, standardized technologies, operating systems, and so forth, which means it now can be streamed and stored on general purpose IT infrastructure. As a matter of fact, if you look at kind of purpose-built appliances, generally called NVRs or network video recorders, those are generally standard Intel-based PCs running Windows operating systems, and just like your traditional IT systems were many years ago, pre-virtualization. But this transformation created some opportunity to be able to manage those in the same way and with the same mature technologies and the processes that IT applies to deployment, to maintenance, to patching, and so forth. But it also does, introduce some management challenges, building server and storage infrastructure to support those needs, making the system highly available and easy to manage, and as well as affordable. So that brings us to the poll question, second poll question here. I think this is a two-parter here. Let me launch this poll. So two-part question here. First, if you are running video surveillance, and it looks like many were, are you already running it virtualized? Are you running it on island, kind of purpose-built, dedicated, standalone hardware like NVRs? And then if you are, and then kind of who are you, so we can understand who are you. Are you responsible for video surveillance and security? And in a lot of organizations, that tends to be a separate group, either fully owning that outside of IT or in conjunction with IT. Jeff, in your environment, how do you, kind of stack up in that line of responsibility? And then how has maybe it changed over the years?
So how it changed over the years was when I came along to Jerry's about full-time 16 years ago, but I was with the organization as a consultant for 10 years prior. The facilities manager who actually owned the video surveillance back in the analog coax days and that kind of thing, basically said what you said, that everything's changing to IP. I think, it'd be better if network and IT and own this. And I foolishly said yes. So so that's how we ended up owning it. However, it's probably worked out for the best. We were able to then move in the direction that everybody else was moving to. I find this poll really interesting. We've got a whole mix of folks on the call that are maybe not totally security based or dedicated, and not necessary, and some IT and some who have responsibility for both. So we do have responsibility for both. We do push a lot of the day-to-day down to the stores, and they do not have a dedicated IT person in their store. So that's one of the reasons having the Scale infrastructure, it's just so easy to manage. They really don't have to do a lot or understand a lot at the store level. So the other thing it's let us do, which I thought of as you were speaking, was we've actually moved away from Windows for our to run those OSs. Both the DW and the Milestone will run on Linux. So we've been able to reduce our license count with the Microsoft servers significantly, and it costs us almost nothing to spin up a new new DVR instance on Scale Computing to be able to spread the load for the different cameras.
Awesome, that's great to hear. So yeah, it is an interesting poll result. So of those who are running video surveillance, a lot of islands, a lot of purpose-built standalone network video recorders. We'll talk a little bit about that and some of the resource trade-offs, some that's already virtualized, and then in terms of the people that are here, a lot of IT, a good number of video surveillance security specific people, and then a whole lot of people that are both. Which is great to see. I mean, I do think, I think that makes sense. The technologies are very much the same. The processes are very much the same. Obviously, the use cases, the consumption, of video data, security data, is different and unique, and a different group within the organization. But using those best practices, being able to share infrastructure, share knowledge and expertise, I think is an important thing that will bring this to the next level. All right, sorry about the glitch here. So as I was saying, this is a document from Milestone on kind of their reference architecture and recommendations for large scale VMS design. And this is, up to hundred thousands of cameras, multiple sites, things like that. But these same benefits, they recommend looking at virtualization in these large scale environments because of some of these benefits, being able to easily clone servers, use portable server images, so you can rapidly deploy recorder VMs, you can move them between clusters, high availability support, seamless migration, live migration of the recorders, the virtual servers from one machine to another, for maintenance, for upgrades, for adding new capacity, things like that. And we'll talk specifically about Scale HC3, some of the things that we do that uniquely provide that. For example, on the HC3 infrastructure, if there's a new software version for the HC3 infrastructure software, we automatically can apply that in a non-disruptive rolling upgrade fashion. So no recorder downtime, no planned maintenance window, things like that. And then a key benefit of virtualization is this dynamic on-the-fly allocation, being able to add memory to a recorder, add CPU, add storage, in many cases with zero disruption to the recorder or to the application, which you just can't do in a physical box. You can buy a new one, you can stack it alongside the old ones. You're adding complexity to the number of things you have to manage and so forth. Whereas with virtualization, as we'll show, and I'm going to do a quick demo of the HC3 interface so you can get an idea of some of these things. It's just one big pool of resources. There's different recorders, different workloads, but the overall infrastructure is one big self-healing pool. So in terms of virtualization, and we're not going to get too deep into this here, there's different ways you can do virtualization when you get into a multi-node high availability environment. Kind of the old way, and you might hear terms like 3-2-1 architecture, where you've got multiple servers, you've got shared storage. In the picture on the left, this might be a VMware environment hosted on HP or Dell servers, backed by Nimble storage on the back end, a separate management server, a whole bunch of pieces, a whole bunch of different vendors that have to be integrated together, patched separately, maintained separately, generally with trained, certified virtualization and storage expertise. That's kind of the old way if you wanted high availability. The new way is HC3, and we're going to talk about several aspects of that, but HC3 is set up as an appliance. It's web-based management interface, no separate management server, non-disruptive system upgrades that I talked about, a self-healing architecture so that as storage devices fail, nodes fails, the system just handles that and keeps your applications running, keeps your video footage recording, rapid deployment, rapid scale out, and as needed, integrated backup and replication. So one of the pieces of that, you may hear this term called hyperconvergence, and this is one of the differences between that kind of picture on the left and picture on the right, is that with hyperconvergence, and we are an HCI or hyperconvergence architecture. As a matter of fact, we were the company that coined that term originally. You integrate servers, storage, and the hypervisor software into a single stack. So from a single vendor, single management, single control plane. And that's what we provide. And that's one of the key things that makes it simpler. We'll talk about some of the others. In the case of VMS resiliency, so if you want to set up a larger scale video security environment where you want high availability, it's important that you've got, not only, in the event of a failure, whether it's a recorder failure or a management server failure, things like that, you want recordings to continue. Many environments, you want access to recordings to continue. And that's kind of a key differentiator to look at, is not just, so if you look at the picture on the left, this is actually out of that same Milestone document, but it's a good way to look at all the typical pieces that you would have in a video management system. You've got a management server, you've got an event server. These are kind of the central brain that all the recorders connect back to. You've got recording servers that normally sit there and receive the data streams from the camera, process them, do motion detection, do whatever extra services, and persist those out to disk. If you want high availability of the recording servers, most VMS vendors provide their own standby recorders, failover recorders. So you might have these pools of primary recorders, secondary recorders. And the way those work is, you've got a secondary recorder that's sitting there, and it's another NVR, it's another box, it's another recording server that sits there basically doing nothing all the time. It's a passive standby machine that's sitting there waiting for if something fails. And if one of the primary recorder fails, that secondary can take over, redirect the camera streams to it, and begin recording new content onto the secondary. That's great. That can provide, at least continue to provide continuity of recording. However, in that failover scenario, that secondary recorder doesn't have access to the footage that was recorded just prior to the failure. That's stored on the primary recording server, and until or unless you resurrect that server, bring it back online, fix whatever the hardware issue was that was causing downtime, you would be without access to those videos. And in some environments, that's totally fine. In other environments, casinos, hospitals, maybe retail, Jeff, we can talk about that. That may not be acceptable. There may be a need to, in all cases, have access to recording footage from 5 minutes ago, an hour ago, 6 hours, 6 days ago. So there's different levels of resiliency that are important to look at. Another thing to note from this diagram is you see, the management server here. It says, oh, we'll put those on a Windows Server cluster. So that's built-in Microsoft clustering software that relies generally on shared storage, so a SAN in between those storage devices. And it's a different way to provide clustering. So lots of different pieces that you might put in place to provide high availability, resiliency for the whole VMS infrastructure. With HC3, one of the things that makes it simple is that everything you do on the HC3 system, every VM you create, every application you're running, every workload you're running, and all data that's stored is inherently highly available. It's distributed across the entire cluster. Any workload, any virtual machine that's running, if that node is running on fails, it moves over to, and just automatically, nobody needs to do anything or check a box or set that up. It resumes, it restarts itself on one of the other available nodes. It has access to redundant copies of all the data. So even in the event of a node failure, you not only have continuity of ongoing recordings, you have the ability to go back and retrieve recordings that occurred just prior to the failure as well. So Jeff, I know, I think we had talked a little bit about kind of your resiliency needs in retail. And again, not everything needs that level of availability in your environment. Where do you fall on kind of your needs for resiliency, and what does access to the video mean for you and your business?
Well, there's a couple of ways to answer that. I'd like to, one of the examples is the most recent piece with COVID. We run grocery stores. We've been, deemed a critical, necessary partner out there for the duration of this COVID, and therefore we've had to, as we've had people, employees maybe exposed, we have to track their movements immediately and find out who they came in contact with, get those people where they need to be, whether they have to go home and quarantine or whatever. But that video has to be available like 10 minutes after we find out. I mean, it's okay. Our HR department is all over that. And so the high availability piece has become hypercritical right now for us. It always was important. Now it's even more important. But the way our architecture is right now, in a normal store, we have probably 80 to 100 cameras, maybe 120, depending on where the location is. We'll have 4 different servers. We'll have every camera set up to be able to go, and that's 4 different virtualizations, right, within the single scale HC3 cluster. And we'll have every camera set to be able to go to a second DVR if the first one fails. Plus, we've got the built-in replication. We have snapshots happening every 5 minutes, up to about 30. So, and we've had all these scenarios happen. We've had node failure. We've had, the boxes themselves, the software locks up or whatever, and so the cameras fail over. So it's been a godsend to be able to do recovery one way or another, even if. So HR's had access to all that stuff right away. So it's been good. Great.
Okay. All right, and we'll talk a little bit more. I guess one of the other things to point out is, as opposed to kind of the picture on the left here, where you kind of have, like, for every production system, you've got this kind of idle standby. So it's like kind of the maximum utilization you could ever expect is about half your overall resources. With Hyperconvergence, with HC3, by putting everything into a single pool, you can go a lot higher utilization. So, and we'll talk a little bit, more detail about that. But, just an easy example is in this 4-node picture above. This is a 4-node HC3 cluster. It's running a bunch of recorders. I could go, in this case, probably up to 75%. of memory utilization across 3 of these nodes and still have room that if one of these systems fails, I've got enough free capacity on 3 remaining nodes to spin those up. And even probably in a 3-node cluster, you could get pretty close to that. So I'm not doing this, 50% of my compute resources just sitting there waiting for something bad to happen. In this case, you kind of have one node level, n+1 level of redundancy required there.
And Dave, just so you know,
yep.
that is pretty much our architecture that you had listed there.
Okay.
4-node cluster. We have a couple of DVRs on each one, that kind of thing.
Okay, perfect. Good to hear. So this is kind of a summary. Why HD3, why hyperconverged infrastructure, simplified single pane management, and we're going to demonstrate that because I think people who haven't seen, especially in the video space, who haven't seen how easy it is to create a new recorder, expand storage. I'll walk through some of that. Rapid, easy deployment of the system initially. These are sold as appliances, so they come fully integrated with all the software you need. The networking, the storage, and the typical experiences, you rack them, cable them, power them up, give them IP addresses, point them to each other to form a cluster. And that can take 20 minutes, and then you're at the point of creating virtual machines or importing existing recorders if you're doing a P2V kind of environment. As I mentioned, there's lots of automation. High availability keeps the system up and running. Self-healing absorbs failures. Another key thing is you can buy what you need when you need and scale easily as needed. You don't need to plan for, in video, I think it's probably to be expected. You're going to add more cameras. You're going to need to cover more footage. You can have higher resolution cameras that need more storage. You're going to have more applications that may be doing analytics and using those data. The expectation is the system's going to change and evolve over 3, 5, 7 years. One way is you try to anticipate, guess all that, and buy the system today that's going to potentially, hopefully, cover all your needs, or you buy a system that easily lets you add on additional nodes down the line, additional storage capacity, additional compute capacity, analytics, GPUs. And a key thing about scale is that the nodes in the cluster don't need to be identical. They don't need to, it's expected, and we test interoperability. We expect that, 3 years down the line, 4 years, 5 years down the line, you're going to add newer, faster, cheaper, better nodes to your existing cluster. Eventually, some of the nodes you have are going to meet their useful end of life. You're just going to evict those out of the cluster. There's no downtime, no disruption. So you can really build kind of an evergreen, expandable, scalable infrastructure, as opposed to buying a whole rack full of NVRs that are single purpose. When they're done, you throw them away, you buy whole new ones, and it's a disruptive kind of forklift migration upgrades. The system is easy. We're going to show some of that. No certifications required to manage, and then all the software you need and management, the virtualization, the hypervisor, the storage is all built in. There's no external licensing on the infrastructure piece. What do customers value most? I think it depends. Simplicity, we've covered a lot. We're going to show a little bit more. The high availability is a key piece, that scalability. And ultimately, it's affordable. It's a complete software stack, no extra pieces to buy. We have 3-node, highly available clustered systems that MSRP starting about $5,000. These are kind of smaller edge form factors, that might be in small retail locations, gas stations, convenience stores, things like that, up to very high capacity 2U rack-based systems with tons of storage. So we do have a customer here, Jeff. So I don't know if this list, if you had to pick one or a couple, what is kind of the highest value aspect here in your experience?
Oh, that's
pick which of your kids
really
you like the best.
I have to
which
pick
your kids
one.
you like the best.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Dave. I really appreciate that. Oh God. I think probably the ease of deployment, to tell you the God's honest truth. We were able to do P2V for a lot of the previous architecture. We, like you said, we've been able to scale as we needed to add other NVR instances into the video. We can, and we are able to use the architecture for other parts of the business, such as we run our point of sale on it, things like that. We run our refrigeration monitoring on it, other things. So we've been able to go to other funding buckets to be able to put all this in a single architecture. So I think the ease of use, followed closely by the self-healing backup replication. That's important. Something you didn't mention that I think is important is we do scale to scale replication.
Okay.
And that's a little farther into the weeds maybe for some people, but since we have, I think we probably have almost 30 of these units out there, we are able to replicate out to another location. And that's been helpful too.
For disaster recovery and so forth.
Disaster recovery in the riots last summer with the George Floyd piece. One of our stores was literally burned down. Another one, we had 7 total damaged quite significantly. 2 of them almost completely, and that video was able to replicate out to other sites. So with that, I'd say I probably cheated. So.
Okay. Well, and that was an interesting. Yeah, you mentioned the stores are impacted by the riots. If I recall, you in at least one case were able to go in and physically remove the entire cluster. One of our small form factor systems moved the cluster to another location out of the store as it was being damaged, and retain that video, bring it up online very quickly. So. Okay, great.
Yeah, it actually wasn't the small form factor system, but
it
still did move, and literally we were able to bring that up in another of our locations.
Okay.
Yeah,
I guess fully integrated. So yeah.
ATF and the FBI were in there looking at things half an hour later. They were so impressed.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, let's continue and get a little more technical here. We've covered kind of this, and I'm going to do a demo showing some HC3. So, a key thing to consider, this webinar is mostly on video and security. However, HC3 runs all your workloads, and in smaller environments, it is perfectly acceptable, in fact, desirable to run other applications alongside video. And some of those may be just applications that your video surveillance relies on, like your Active Directory, your DNS, infrastructure type pieces there, firewall security, maybe VDI, remote desktop access on a smaller scale to get access to the video, as well as, video storage, file storage, database workloads, analytics. All these things can run on HC3. Virtual machines, also containerized workloads, Kubernetes. We have customers running all those things on HC3, and most of them alongside video, other applications side by side. A little bit of background. So HC3 Scale, we work with a number of video specific partners. So hardware integrators, systems integrators in the video and security space, on some very, very large scale VMS deployments, thousands of cameras, things like that. And in that case, that's enough of a beast on its own to kind of do the sizing just for that. When we started in that area, started seeing interest in that area many years ago, we reached out to our existing customer base as well, and somewhat unbeknownst to us, because nobody ever really come and said, "Hey, can I put this?" I think Jeff, you just put it on your system. You didn't ask us first, and we did a survey on our customers and found a very significant percentage of our customers, a lot of which are what we call edge type of locations, retail stores, manufacturing, things like that, with lots of locations, and video security tends to be an application, and the most of them have, especially along with other things like access control, the door locks that integrate into the VMS system in many cases. So we found a lot of it was already out there running alongside other applications and running just great. And then we also do see these kind of purpose-built large scale VMS deployments as well. So let me, I think I'm gonna have to get out of full screen here, and let me do a quick demonstration of the HC3 system. When we ever get back to in-person trade show events, things like that, we love to let customers get on the web user interface and do this themselves to see how easy it is. But this is the web user interface for a particular Scale HD3 system. This is one that we have is a very high capacity system, a petabyte of raw storage. This is one we're doing some active VMS testing on right now. But one of the key things to see is how easy it is to create a new virtual machine. So if I wanted to create a new recorder, I wanted, maybe it's Windows, maybe it's Linux, whatever. I want this recorder to have 8 virtual CPUs. I want to give it, oops, I lost my keyboard. I want to give it, all right, give it 16 gig of RAM. I want to give it 100 gig OS drive, and then I want to give it an 8 terabyte video storage drive. And maybe I want to install from fresh, or I have an image, whatever. It's that easy to create a new VM. And then at that point, I would be, oops, I just lost my VPN. Let me do this here. Hold on one sec. All right, so that easy to create a new virtual machine. You also, as I mentioned earlier, you can have templates. So for example, when I was deploying some Milestone XP, I set up a Windows template, pre-installed Windows, had all the optimizations, all the settings that I wanted for that, and spinning up one of those is as easy as clone one. This one had a whole bunch of video storage attached to it. So those are some of the kinds of things that in the virtualized environment, in the hyperconverged environment, are easy. Notice I didn't have to say what node do I want to run this on, or create storage arrays or anything like that. The system kind of virtualizes and abstracts all of that so that I don't need to worry about those things. Let's take a running recorder here. Let's say that this Mirasys VM, it's only got 9 terabytes of storage. I want to add additional disk resources to it. I can do that while it's running. Let's give that an 8 terabyte virtual storage, and that in just a couple of seconds is now going to be available. I can go into the operating system, format it, make it available to the VMS system. No downtime, no disruption. Anything involved there. So I would encourage anyone who wants to get a deeper demo, dig into some of the more advanced features like replication, things like that. We do weekly scheduled webinars. You can sign up through the Scale website, get access to a full in-depth webinar of all the features of HC3 in depth. But I at least wanted to show some that I think are particularly relevant in the video space, and would contrast all of those of you who have standalone purpose-built NVR video recorders, the kinds of things that you just can't do in that kind of environment. So let me go back to the slides here. So VMS software running on HC3. It's just a Windows or Linux application, can be installed inside any HD3 virtual machines. In some cases, it could even be a virtual appliance. There's some partners that we've started working with that, their VMS system is basically, it's all pre-configured as a virtual appliance. You just import it into the HD3 system, power it up, clone them as many as you need, power them up. Some of them even just get a DHCP address, phone home to a cloud service and configure themselves. But it's very easy to deploy. Software that we've tested or heard from customers, and this list kind of grows as the day goes on. We've done a lot of work with Milestone, Protect VMS. We have several configurations that are verified and listed if you go to the Milestone marketplace that are listed there. We've done work with Genetec with their security center, Omnicast, DW Spectrum's digital watchdog. That's one of the products that Jeff uses. He's used it. We've also done some trial work with that here. Blue Iris is kind of an entry level one. They may have 100 camera limit, or at least I think what we've seen is generally smaller, 100 camera or less deployments, but super easy. Many customers of ours using that. Pelco, we've heard Panasonic. There's a really long laundry list of players out there. Axis was one that has come up. Long laundry list of players. Almost all of them are either Windows or Linux based. Can install and run on HC3 at larger scale. And I have another slide. We'll talk about this. You want to get into some sizing complexity, but kind of a rule of thumb. If you're doing a low end system, under 50 reasonable, cameras that you're going to see today will pretty much run on anything that we have, and plenty of resources. As a matter of fact, one of the configurations that's in the Milestone marketplace is a configuration based on our HE150 system, which is an entry-level small form factor system. Oh, I happen to have, I don't know if this will stretch to my camera here. Nope, that's not going to show with my thing here. Actually, I have one of them here. It's a little 4x4-inch cube. It's based on the Intel NUC, if you've seen that hardware, where we clustered those together for what like you might see in a small retail edge location. Ran, in this case, it was Milestone, 50 cameras, 4 megabit streams, and alongside other applications that you would be running in a edge environment like that. Hyperconvergence is really well suited for distributed edge location like retail, entertainment, hospitality, manufacturing, because it can run all the on-premises applications that are critical on that single resilient platform. Everything's inherently resilient and is designed to be easy to deploy, as Jeff mentioned. Doesn't require IT staff on site. It's self-healing, it's resilient, it's going to heal itself. And in the case of these remote sites, we have customers who, it's very costly, very expensive to get to these remote sites. I don't know actually if any of these are running video, but the most extreme cases, we have HC3 systems on board ocean-going vessels that go out to sea for 6 months at a time and run applications that are critical to that ship. Have very, very little network connectivity, intermittent, slow satellite links that work. So they need a platform that sits there and runs autonomously. They don't have IT people on these ships. It's very expensive to send replacement hardware out there. So they design their clusters with enough hardware over provisioning that things are going to fail, and multiple disk drives are going to fail, and they have excess capacity to handle that. And the HC3 system doesn't require that you replace that failed hardware immediately. You can, as long as you have the capacity to continue operating there, and you can design that in, you can place this in very, very, no IT, very rugged environments, very remote environments either. And even in more normal environments, you can avoid the expensive, urgent truck rolls, 4-hour on-site, sending a tech out to replace hardware and things like that. As I mentioned, we would encourage you to look at the benefits of running other physical security applications, infrastructure servers on the same platform, as well as other applications based on their resource needs. And our systems engineering team can help, guide you through the sizing, what applications wouldn't necessarily play nice together, and so forth. Sizing cluster examples. I mentioned the Scale HE150 cluster, the 50 camera validated configuration there. And this is a system that 3-node cluster with high availability starts as low as, it's under $15,000 MSRP. And then I'll have a slide at the end that I'll probably put up during some of the questions and answers that will kind of show our entire product line. So we can talk about some of those, but we have small, medium, large, and then for these very large configurations, like I said, we have some partners that we work with on even custom kind of hardware that can go into this multi-thousand camera range, and so on and so forth. So just some general solution design for those who are looking at this. Most of the VMS providers have calculators, and one of the nice things about video surveillance is it's pretty much math. It's kind of a constant workload in most cases. So you can do calculations on how many cameras do you have, what their bit rate is. Are you doing, recording everything, or are you, only recording on motion? And you can estimate, this environment's going to be 20% motion, so I'm going to be recording 20% of the time. What's your retention period? Are you retaining data for 7 days, 30 days, 90 days? So in some cases, the calculators will give you guidance on what kind of resources you need in terms of storage capacity, network capacity, so forth. Just as a guideline, I would say don't skimp on CPU cores or cycles. Within the HC3 system, if you get into larger systems, using 10 gigabit at your network backbone and for the HC3 node-to-node backplane is generally recommended when you get into that medium large scale. Doesn't mean you need to be 10 gigabit throughout the environment. Another thing is to consider, if you have longer term retention requirements, consider archiving off the primary HC3 system to a separate NAS, to a separate SAN or cloud storage for long-term retention and capacity. So as an example, one of the things we did with that HE150, which has fairly limited storage capacity, is we set it up to retain on the HC3 system all the recorded footage for 7 days, but then after that, archive it off to a remote file server. And that's a function that's provided by the Milestone software. Archive data older than 7 days off to a UNC file share, which in this case happened to be a file share running a product called Azure File Sync from Microsoft that presents a Windows Server file share, has a little bit of cache to store data locally, but then puts all the data up in Azure Blob storage or Azure File storage, where it can sit fairly inexpensively for months or years if you want to. And so it's kind of a way to do hybrid cloud long-term retention storage. Multiple clusters are easy to manage for additional scale out. So, you know, if you're in these very large multi-camera environments, we're not going to create a massive cluster. It makes sense to even to divide that up into groups of 8 node clusters, kind of pods, you might think of them. But we do have the ability to centrally manage multiple clusters. And some of the benefits are additional scale out, isolation, and then obviously across locations. We make it easy to put compute and storage resources where they make sense, as opposed to having to make a trade-off of sending large amounts of data across the wire. And then kind of the last point is wide striped distributed pools of spinning disks, which is one of the common storage configurations for video on HC3, aggregate not only performance but capacity. And the performance is maybe the thing that is not obvious, but because of the way the cluster, I don't know if I actually did go into the storage tab, but one of the clusters we looked at had 4 nodes, each of them had 18 spinning disks. And every disk there is available to every single VM, every single recorder for storage performance and capacity. That's what that wide striping means, is that we take all the data and we stripe pieces of it across all the spinning disks. So we're aggregating the performance of all of those disks together. It also means that when you add additional nodes to the cluster, you're adding more capacity and more performance. So you've got now more disks to do more work and so forth. So, and that also is especially important when you talk about disk failures and rebuild. So in the case of one of these large clusters, and these are large disks, so if one of them fails and we now need to replace its role in the cluster, like you would think of a RAID rebuild, that's an all-to-all, every disk to every disk rebuild that happens after a disk failure. So even on a high capacity 12 terabyte, 16 terabyte, 18 terabyte disk that might be full, fairly full, when it fails, all the other disks in that, when the new one is replaced, all go to work at restoring data. They all have bits and chunks of that data that might be used to replace or rebuild after a disk. And as I mentioned earlier, it's also not required that you go replace that. We're going to regain resiliency using available free space in the cluster even before you replace that disk capacity. So lots of disks are good and give you a lot of flexibility. So kind of moving into the wrap up phase here. HC3 has been out there for many years. One of the founders and creators of the Hyperconverged architecture and the terminology we sell across small to very large customers, and a lot of focus in this edge, remote office, branch office, retail, so forth. So see large grocery store chains, hardware chains, and Jerry's Foods, obviously, on here, down to smaller and everything in between mid-market environments. Highly rated. If you're considering HC3 for the first time, strongly would encourage you to go out into any of these, outstanding community sites, whether it's Spiceworks, Gartner, Trust Radius, Tech Validate, there's tons of reviews out there, thousands of reviews from HC3 customers probably in your vertical market, probably down the street from you, that you can look up on there. We'd be happy to help you find ones that are most relevant, but we look at these very religiously, as well as things like our Net Promoter Score, to ensure that we're doing the right things and building the right things for our customers. Um, and again, we offer solutions really from edge, from those small form factor systems. You can kind of see on the left, those are our HE150 systems relative to our rack mount and tower systems that you might see in a more traditional data center, all the way up to cloud resources and so forth. So we offer cloud disaster recovery as a service options, but a wide range of nodes that can be purchased, different compute capacities, different storage capacities. I've mostly focused on high availability and, so the 3-node cluster configuration. There are cases, and we do support single node operations. You don't have node level resiliency there, but there's some cases where you don't have the same high availability needs, kind of cache locations, things like that. But you still want to have that same umbrella of management, same set of tools to be able to run applications. So we do offer some single node configurations. That's where you see kind of those up above there. And with that, I don't know, Jeff, I guess, anything else that you wanted to, add here, and then we'll kind of move into more general Q&A. Audience, if you haven't submitted your questions yet, pop them in there now. But Jeff, anything that you'd like to add or
No, I mean, I guess the only thing I was going to mention is, on the far right of your graphic there, that's where we're moving to. We're going to start working with your team to do Azure integration. I know there's quite a bit of work that Scott and your development team have done to make that integration really seamless. So we're looking forward to moving some of our architecture into that piece with our on-site and in the cloud.
Okay, awesome. Let me, okay, I'm trying to pull up the questions here and they're popping up somewhere on my many monitors. Let's see. I guess while I'm trying to find that window.
Hey, Dave, actually, I can jump on and I can read some of the questions that have come in. So Jeff, thanks for hopping on here today, man. We always appreciate it when our customers jump on. So I just wanted to say that first off. So a couple questions that we've had come in. One of the first ones was, when I'm deploying this system, am I deploying this specific for just my VMS, or am I able to run additional workloads alongside and use this for other things?
Okay.
I mean, in our case, I'll answer.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
We originally were deploying it for our point of sale, for high availability of our point of sale systems. We have to have an on-site point of sale because if the internet goes down, and our point of sale is internet based, we would not be able to run the store, and we can lose up to $100,000 in less than an hour of sales. So we originally brought it on for that. The video was actually an add-on, and then we found it was so successful that we did move all. We have now moved 98% of all our video over there. We've got a few more deployments left.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say it, the answer of what's right for you, like everything, it depends. I mean, if it's a, really depends on your suite of applications. On the smaller scale, I'd say absolutely combine them. On larger scales, I mean, if you're talking, you're trying to, very high-end video surveillance, you're trying to push the max out of that hardware. If you're doing that, you're not going to leave room available necessarily for your other applications to fit on there and play nicely. It's kind of a Tetris-like problem of how you jigsaw all these things together. Our systems engineering team is great at helping you figure that out. And like I said, it's not, it would still be in your advantage if you had, here's a HC3 cluster optimized for video. I'm going to run all my video surveillance applications on it. Right next to it in the rack, I'm going to have a 3-node HC3 cluster that's my other applications and general purpose. And some of the reasons you might want to do that are maybe the different storage types. Like video is absolutely totally fine and very cost effective on spinning disk media. Your other applications you may want 100% on flash, and we have everything from all spinning disk nodes that cluster together to all flash nodes and NVMe flash, very fast, that you may want to put your database and your analytics workloads, or you're doing high-end VDI, you may want NVMe flash, and you don't want to spend that amount of money to put video surveillance storage on that. We do have hybrid clusters or tiered clusters that have some of both. And Within that, our software has the ability to, well, first of all, it has the ability to just manage it all for you in the best way, and that's what most customers do. It also does, for other cases, have the ability to let you on a per workload and even per virtual disk basis, set priorities for how that hybrid or tiered system should use the flash. For example, if I were doing video surveillance, a recorder VM on a tiered system, what I would do is I would have my Windows operating system or Linux operating system use flash for fast boot times on the operating system, for any databases or config files that are stored on that operating system drive or page files. So I'd either leave the flash priority default or maybe even crank it up higher. And then for the video storage volumes, the virtual disk for video storage, I would set that heat slider, we call it, flash priority down to 0, so that those virtual disks don't use any of the flash because it's not needed for the video retention. That's just a continuous streaming, sequential writing, eventually overwrited stuff. It doesn't require flash in terms of the IOPS or latency or things like that. So it really depends, and there's design trade-offs and configurations on both sides. But I do think one of the big benefits of HC3, of Hyperconvergence, are those environments where you can either run them both together or at least have the same infrastructure management for both systems, even if you choose to keep them separate.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. Dave. And then another question. Can we utilize our own IP cameras, or are there specific cameras and hardware that need to be purchased for that?
Okay. Yeah, so that's really mainly a question for whatever VMS software you're going to run. And, they have, for example, and Milestone will work, they have a list of supported cameras that they work with. And most any VMS out there, there's a few that are kind of closed, proprietary, will work with a standard called ONVIF, ONVIF. That most cameras, including very inexpensive IP-based cameras, it's kind of a standard way of presenting the camera streams to a recorder. For ONVIF cameras, they will work with most any VMS, and most VMS providers support ONVIF cameras. There are some proprietary cameras that may only work or may work better or have special features with certain VMS software. But in general, you can use existing cameras, and if you have a fleet of existing IP cameras, chances are you can find some VMS software that will run on Windows or Linux, run inside a VM, and work with those existing cameras.
Yeah, we've done that and had been able to even do mix and matches if we didn't have enough funds during that budget year to maybe replace the cameras, but we brought in a new VMS software. We would utilize the existing cameras, stream them on, and then as we decided to cut over some or all of them, we could seamlessly replace a camera and still keep video recording the whole time. So we haven't had any problems. Some cameras run better with other with different VMS, and the VMS software is definitely Milestones and DW and all those folks will tell you which cameras that run the best. But like he said, if they've got ONVIF, they'll run with pretty much anything.
Jeff, that leads right into another question that came in. And earlier on in the presentation, I think you mentioned that you were kind of running your video surveillance on that more traditional setup. What does the migration from that onto the HC3 system look like, and kind of what was your time frame plan, and how quickly were you able to get that done?
Well, we had a couple of different migration strategies. The biggest thing for us was to have it be seamless as far as the not losing big chunks of video or video time, which we would have before. When you did a full scale, forklift upgrade, unfortunately, you'd either have to leave the other system up and running, point people to that one to access that video, or in the case of a failure, it was just gone. And then you'd have your new system. With this, we were able to actually do a couple of different migration strategies. We could stream one camera to 2 locations if we wanted to for a while. If we were cutting over to a different software from what we had before in a location, we were able to set up the new software and cut over cameras individually. So there was a bunch of different migration strategies basically based on the scenario, but the HC3 allowed us to be super flexible on how we did that. So some of them we did the P2V, which is a migration from a permanent kind of, hardware structure, physical machine over to the virtual machine. It sounds probably more complex than it really is. Scale provides a software that makes it really, really as close to, I hate it, but as close to seamless as possible.
Lift and shift.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Right. So
it's
I
nice.
actually,
So
go ahead, Jeff.
no, I was just going to say there's been a number of different ways to do it, but it's all a lot easier once you're virtualized.
All right, so one final question, and then Dave, I'll let you wrap things up as we near the top of the hour. We saw the pricing on the slide with the appliances. What additional virtualization licensing needs to be added on top of that cost if I'm moving from physical to virtual, or adding in new video surveillance that I currently don't have?
Sure. Well, yeah. So all the infrastructure, virtualization software, storage software, the management, the web, HD3 web management that I showed, that's all included as part of the appliance. So at the point of creating VMs, then you're just getting into the tool for P2V migration. There's an extra cost for that, and our sales team can quote out depending on the number that you're doing, what the costs are for that, and also what you're coming from, because there's some, if you're you may the amount of disruption, downtime you're willing to take, there may be different options. From the VMS software, that really, that obviously is very specific on the VMS software, kind of the high level. If you haven't done it, most VMS software seems to be based on cameras, which I think is very, as opposed to number of recording servers. So I think which is very advantageous when you're looking at putting it on a scale out hyperconverged infrastructure. You're not penalized, you're actually encouraged to kind of load balance and distribute. If you're going to pay the same for 500 cameras, whether you do 10, 50 VM recorders or 500 camera recorders, it's kind of the same. It lets you have the design flexibility of how many recorders do you want to spread your load across, how many physical HC3 nodes then do you want to have to host those workloads, and then as you change, or expand or scale out the infrastructure over time. But that's, again, the VMS licensing costs, which you'd have to obtain from them or your channel partner or integrator that may be putting all the solution together for you. In the case of Windows, Jeff mentioned Microsoft licensing. That can be an additional cost to consider. If you're doing Linux-based systems, may not matter. If you have additional existing Windows data center licenses, if you're doing a large number of VMs, that's generally what we see on used on HC3 for Windows licensing, because then you just have unlimited VMs and you can move them around at will without being concerned about the Windows server licensing. But it really just depends on all the pieces that you have in play.
Excellent. All right, that covers all the questions. So
great. I'm glad we got through all that. And Jeff, I want to thank you very, very much for your time and insights and experience, and love your background there. I'll let you get back to your fun, and but appreciate everyone who was able to join that, and definitely encourage you to reach out to Scale at the info at Scale Computing above, or give us a ring, and we're happy to discuss more, demo more, and help you on your video surveillance and security journey.